The lesson comes from the parable of the talents. I think most of us in here have at least heard that at least once or twice or maybe 100 times. So we know what he's talking about in that. And we're going to use that text really as a guide. We're not going to go through and just dissect it. We're going to use it as a guide for our study this evening to talk about the different talents that we can have and we can use and how we can use them, and even the reasons why sometimes people do not use their talents. We might say more properly use excuses. People don't use their talents. The purpose behind the parable of the talents, or one of the purposes, is to encourage the disciples to use their talents for God after Christ's ascension. After Christ has ascended into heaven, after his death on the cross and resurrection, he ascended into heaven, and the disciples, the apostles specifically, were left not alone. The Bible tells us they were sent a helper, but Christ was not there with them physically any longer. I think about there, I believe it's in Matthew 18, we talk about sometimes those who, those verses that talk about where two or three are together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Oftentimes use that incorrectly, but those verses are used to encourage those disciples who are involved in the act of confronting someone in sin. Those were actually used as a sense of encouragement, knowing that when you follow those steps previously mentioned, going to them alone and then with one or two others in before the church, that when you do those things in a biblical sense, that you have the approval of God and the support of God, because you have done what the Lord has told you concerning those things. So both of those are to encourage the disciples, and for us today, they're to encourage us to use our talents. Because despite what you may think, everyone in this room has a talent of some sort that can be used for the church, that can be used for God, and be used in a lot of different ways. In Matthew 25, beginning in verse 15, the Bible says, "And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability, and immediately he went on a journey." Now we want to point out in this verse, you notice is that everyone had a talent. Some had more than others, but every person had at least one talent. Now, for the sake of our lesson this evening, we're not talking about talents as in money. We're talking about actual talents. And that is things we actually can do for the church. When you think about some examples of possible Christian talents, because when you say talents, sometimes we think, well, the world has their own idea of talents, don't they? And many times they're not talents at all. They're just sinful things people are involved in. But you think about the different talents that a Christian could possess. What are some of the talents that a Christian could have? I mean, of course, this is not a hard question. So what are some talents that a Christian may have? Anybody? Public speaking. What else? I didn't have that in high school. Sometimes I still don't have it. It kind of depends.
A lot of charisma.
Charisma. Okay, if you want to look at it as a talent.
Well, you need charisma, to be a good speaker. You need to be a good song leader. And so, yeah, that would be a talent.
Okay, charisma, public speaking. What else? Hardworking. What are some that we don't think about sometimes? One is very simple. The first one I thought of was what? Patience. Okay, yes, that is a talent. As I tell people, when you pray for patience, be ready to be taught patience, sometimes in a very rigorous way, but it is a talent because not everyone has patience. You go anywhere that there could be possibly a line of people waiting for a service, you know that patience can run thin. At Walmart, every time I go, it's tested, because not just the lines, but the type of people in there, the patience is tested. So it is a talent. But what about someone who is an encourager? When I think about a talent that we miss sometimes in the church, I think that's a very basic one that we miss, is someone that simply encourages others. And not just in one area, but they can encourage someone in various different areas, no matter what area they may be. 1 Thessalonians 3 and verse 2, Paul says, "And sent Timothy our brother and minister of God, and our fellow laborer in the gospel of Christ, to establish you and encourage you concerning your faith." Sometimes we just simply need to be encouraged to remain faithful. Because being a Christian, we know there are a lot of things that can pull us away from God and pull us away from the church. So we need encouragement. If you have one person or several persons who are just a great encouragement, they're good at encouraging others, I say sometimes pumping them up, lifting them up, that is a huge asset to the church. Because you take that encourager, they can do a lot of helping and removing a lot of the negativity that others may bring into the building when they come in or when they get together with the saints. So an encourager is a huge talent for someone to have, to lift someone up. The second one I want us to think about is someone who helps others or is willing to help others who may be struggling. Acts chapter 9, in reference to Dorcas, you remember, it talks about here in Acts 9, verse 39, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. This is showing some of the activities this woman, and no doubt a man could do some of the same things as well, that she did to help others. Now we see here, the Bible says, tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. It could have been for them, it could have been for others, we don't know. The point is, she was generous with her talents. She had a talent with making garments and doing different things. We'll see in a moment in verse 36, she was very charitable. So she had a talent that she could use for the church, and she did use it. As we see there in verse 39, one of the reasons they were weeping for this person is why? Because she was a good worker for the Lord. And not just by her making garments was she helping others, but she also is encouraging others by her work. So one talent that we have may actually spur off into more than just one talent. If you're good at doing things for others, helping others, well, you're not just helping them, you're also encouraging them. So now you have two talents. What about someone, I really couldn't think of a verse that we could use for this, but it is something we need to do. Someone who is a promoter of church events and activities. Someone who goes out and they invite people to services. They invite people to gospel meetings, to lectureships, to VBSs, to whatever it may be that we have. They're a promoter of the church. Because, pardon?
Personal worker.
Personal worker, yes. And they're doing that work. They're trying to put out the work of the church and trying to get people to come. And you think about, if that is a talent, well, where you have one positive thing, you also have the negative. They can also kind of reverse some of the effects of others who have not gone out and done these types of things, who have not promoting the activities of the church, and they're not going out and inviting others. So they also has a positive effect in the sense that they can counteract others who are not doing those things. So we have seen an encourager, a helper to the struggling, someone who promotes the activities of the church and the events of the church, but also a server. And I don't mean this in just the sense of when we say server, we think sometimes a restaurant server, but someone who is actually going out willing to do things. And what I thought about was someones who go out and they prepare meals for those who are at home who are sick, those who lost loved ones, like we've done here recently with the passing of Charlotte, going and taking food and preparing those types of things and doing other things that can ease the burden on them. They're a servant for God, and they're encouraging them by that. Acts chapter 9 and verse 36 says, at Joppa there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds which she did. And I use that verse just to show that charitable deeds is more than just making things. It's more than just taking food to someone, but a lot of things actually are encompassed in the idea of charitable deeds. You know, sometimes we don't think about it, but giving up your time is a charitable deed. Because today we have a lot of things pulling on our time that take a lot of time to prepare and do. So giving up of our time itself is a charitable deed. But many times we know, of course, that's not enough, but it is one of the things we can give up.
Phoebe.
What's that?
Phoebe.
Phoebe?
Yeah, Romans 16, 1 and 2. She was a servant for Paul. She served the brethren there, or was going to. So.
There you go. So there's a lot of different talents that it says she was a servant to Paul. it just, servant means she did apply to a lot of different things for them. And when we think about the idea of a servant or a person who does these different things, is there are probably a lot of things involved and talents we have that we never even consider to be a talent. We don't think about in those types of ways. But if you look also at Titus chapter 2, one of the talents we may have, and I'm kind of dealing some with, of course, men are in here too, but they're not on this one. A speaker on the ladies' day. Men, you can't be a speaker on the ladies' day, or I guess you could, but typically it's a woman on a ladies' day that's the speaker, isn't it? Well, if you go to Titus chapter 2 and verse 4, we see that the teaching of a woman, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, and we know there's other verses that talk about that as well. But one of the talents a woman, for instance, could have is the ability and the willingness to get up and to present a lesson on a ladies' day. Or, as we're going to see in a moment also, to teach a Bible class for the appropriate Bible class, those types of things. There are talents involved in that. What about a worker in various church events and activities? And when I think about a worker, there's always one verse I go to in the Old Testament, the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah 4 and verse 6, where the people had a mind to work. Sadly, in the church today, and I really don't think that's the case here in Ulaga. We're so small, I can say this. I know everyone here pretty well. There's a lot of workers, but we know that other places that's not the case, is it? We have a lot of people who are not workers that they could be. Sometimes we like to sit back and let others do things, and we ourselves could jump in there and do the work for the church and do various different things. Workers in various church events and activities. I want you to think for a moment, here at Ulaga, we know the events we do, but if you're from a different congregation, think about some of the events that your congregation does, and think about all the different areas of work that you can be involved in. For us here, of course, VBS, obviously right now, we have a lot of workers here doing various works to help carry out this event that we're doing. Gospel meetings involve a lot of work. Summer series, getting those things lined up involves work. Gospel singings that we do, all these different events that we arrange here, and I'm thinking stuff that we do. I don't know everything you guys do. But there are works that we can get in and get involved in and help the church, help others, and also we are encouraging others by doing that.
Russ?
Yes.
I think that's a talent in itself, is the ability to encourage others. There's a congregation in Arkansas that I'm familiar with that I've come to understand that the preacher basically does everything. Now, he's got a great talent for that, but what's happened is everybody else is just expecting him to take care of it, and they're not involved, they're not utilizing their talent. So I see, it being a talent to be able to encourage others, like you just said, and sometimes letting go of your desire, even though you have a talent to do it, you've got to encourage others to get and utilize their talents.
We need to be willing to delegate to those who can do things. Sure, a lot of us can do a lot of different things, but we have others who aren't doing a thing. Willing to help, we can do those things and delegate those things. Because in a few years, that preacher's going to be burned out.
Well, he's been there for over 20. I don't know how he's made it, but he's...
He must be very tired if he's doing everything.
I don't know what will happen to that congregation.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, and this is a little off subject, when someone like that, a worker like that, leaves, the church kind of has like a slap in the face. Oh, look at all this stuff that needs to be done. Yeah. One man was doing all this, and so obviously there's a lot of things we can be involved in, and sometimes we do need to delegate things to those who are willing. We can't force people to do things they don't want to do, but we do need to delegate for sure.
I think that's key to Christian maturity, especially young Christians.
Mm-hmm.
The quicker you can get them involved in doing things and being a part of everything, the stronger they're going to get.
Yes.
I mean, the more they just sit there and come and aren't involved with anything and doing anything other than just coming,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not going to grow near as fast.
Yeah, if you think back to when you're first converted, when's the first time you got up to lead a prayer? If you're a man. Maybe I should put that on there. If you're a man, when's the first time you get up to lead a prayer? In a lot of places, it's pretty quick. They want to get you involved. And really, as a new Christian, at least my experience was, I wanted to get involved. What can I do? And sadly for the church I was with, they needed a song leader, so they had a very poor song leader for a while. But I did that because I didn't really have the talent necessarily. I got a little bit better, but I did have that ability to do that and willingness to do that and improve. And that's another point is when we use our talents, they improve. They get better. We may not become the greatest song leader there ever was, but we do improve as we use our talents.
Well, the parable of the talents, I mean, they were to increase
Yes.
and develop and grow. If we stay stagnant with what we can do and we don't ever mature onto other things, then we stay stagnant.
Right.
We don't ever mature in areas and do what we're supposed to do.
And that we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's what the problem was with the steward. He had the one talent. He didn't do anything. He just sat on it. And so that's why he had the rebuke that he had. So being an encourager, helping those who are struggling, promoter of church events and activities, and of course this is not an extensive list, obviously, because we'd be here all night. A servant of the church and a servant of others, a speaker for maybe a ladies' day, a worker in various church events and activities, and along the same lines, a Bible class teacher. 2 Timothy 1 and verse 5, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded is in you also, talking about how young Timothy was taught by his mother and by his grandmother. Now, Paul is emphasizing really how he was taught a lot, not just in the assembly, but also at home. But you notice that these ladies had talents. We don't know how great of a teacher they would have been, but it doesn't matter because they used their talents to what? To teach Timothy the gospel. And it's interesting that you have this young man who obviously during this time didn't know a lot about the gospel. That's why he needed to be taught. That it's two ladies who are doing that, or teaching him. So they're using their talents to teach, and no doubt we have talents today that we can use to do that. Sometimes when we need Bible class teachers, we have those who are willing to do it, but really don't know how. When I was in Crocker, I had a few classes for those who are willing, talking about how to prepare a material for a Bible class, how to prepare an outline, a material for an outline, those types of things. So you have those who are willing, but they don't know how. So those who are willing, we need to take the time to teach them how to do something, and then they can use that willingness, and before you know it, they're using a great talent. And lastly, for what we're looking at this evening, preach the gospel. Preaching the gospel day, of course, when we say that, we know there are a lot of those who have talent for public speaking, but they don't have talent as being a gospel preacher. What I mean by that is they get up and they speak, but they don't actually preach the gospel. So they're not actually a gospel preacher. They're just a public speaker. That's what I call them, because if you're going to be a gospel preacher, you got to preach the gospel. Well, in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 2, 2 Timothy 4 verses 1 and 2, I charge you therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and teaching. And then we find in verse 3 the reason why. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. So what is he telling Timothy to do? Preach the word. Now we know Paul knew that Timothy had the ability and the talent, because we just saw there in 2 Timothy 1 and verse 5 that he was taught by his mother and grandmother about the gospel. So he wasn't ignorant, he was knowledgeable, and he tells him what? Go out and preach the word. He had the talent, so he's encouraging him to do that, to use that talent. And one of the last verses I want us to look at before we get on to our next section is Colossians 3 and verse 23. Sometimes this is a verse that we know, but we don't actually put it into action. Whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. Because in the workplace sometimes when we don't always do things to the very best of our ability. And that is not right for the Christian. But also when it comes to the church, it's unacceptable to God. We give our very best. Even if we don't know how to do everything maybe the way it should be, maybe I should say we're not the best at it. But we do it to the very best of our ability. That's the idea behind whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord. You think about someone, if they were to get up on a Sunday morning and you come into the worship assembly. Let's say you came in here on a worship assembly. On a Sunday morning, we have our singing, we have our Bible classes, we have our singing, we have the worship assembly, we have our Lord's Supper, we give the contribution. then say, I stood up and gave a 5-minute lesson and sat down. Is that giving heartily to the Lord, or working heartily to the Lord for the lesson that I prepared for the congregation? Well, no, it's not. That is, I have the ability obviously to do a lot more than that, and to give less than what we really could give. We're not going to be pleasing to God. So whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord. Now, I know when some of us first began preaching, when I was first beginning preaching, my lessons were that long, not on purpose, because I didn't know. That's how short they were. You ran out of gas, and of course, as you go along, you improve. But when we know better and we have the talent, and what do? We use that talent to do better, to improve. We don't stay at the same level of mediocre. We improve, and we give our very best to God. And when we think about our talents, that's really that was the title of the lesson, do your best for tonight. Well, when we're talking about the church, we should do our best. No matter what it is, we give our very best to God. If we're to clean the building, we clean it the very best way we know how. If we're to go out and door knock, we do it to the very best of our ability. If we're to teach a Bible class, we do it to the very best of our ability. Whatever it is, we do our very best, because we see here in verse 23, it says, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord, as you would do to the Lord, and not to men.
You might get to it, but when you do it heartily, you need to do it as it says in Ephesians 2:14. Do it without complaining and disputing.
Yes.
You can do something, but when you have a bad attitude about it, your influence is very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember I was in South Carolina, and we had a man who would get up and lead singing if he very much had to. We had one song leader who was very good, but when he wasn't there, we have another man who could lead singing, but he didn't always do it. So sometimes even when he was there, I was doing everything else. Well, one of the reasons for that was he was too busy murmuring and complaining about, well, do I have to do this? Do I have to do this? Well, you don't have to, no. But you should want to. That's the difference. You don't have to do anything, but being a Christian, you think about all the things God's done for us, well, hello, you should want to do that, whatever it may be. So definitely, that's a good point, without murmuring and complaining, because sometimes as human beings, we begin to whine, we do a little bit more than what we maybe were thinking we're going to be doing, and we need to work on that. Our next point is responsibilities of those with talents. And one of the things we've heard probably before in the past is if you have the ability, or ability plus opportunity equals responsibility. If you have the ability and you have the opportunity, it is your responsibility as a Christian to use that talent. If you have a talent to talk to people and are easily able to engage someone, and you have that ability, you have that opportunity, what do? Well, it's your responsibility to use that. Now, as Christians, we should use that anyway, but that's just my example. If we have the ability and we have the opportunity, it is our responsibility to use that talent. Doing nothing with our talents is the issue we're looking at in Matthew 25 and verse 18. But he who had received one, that is the one talent, went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. Now, as we're going to look at later, we know that we all are given different talents. And we're not going to be, even as the Bible says almost word for word, we're not going to be judged on talents that we weren't given. We're not going to be judged on, expected to do something we just cannot do. When you think about something that you would like to do, but you just don't have the ability, don't have the know-how, well, we're not going to be judged on those things. If you can't do it, you're not going to be judged upon it. But we look here in verse 28, or verse 18 rather, the problem with this man is he went and he hid he dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. If you have the talent, and I'm using this example, you can put it for anything. If you have the talent to get up and lead a prayer, let's say that's a very simple one. It's not song leading, it's not preaching, it's just a few moments of giving a prayer before a congregation. You have that talent, but you don't use it. You think about someone who has, and I think this is probably true in a lot of congregations, especially small ones, because people don't like to stand up in front of groups. You have those people who are sitting down in the pews, you have the ability, they have the talent, but they're hiding it. They're sitting on it. They want you to know they can do it because they really don't want to do that. And one of the things is when you call on someone sometime to do something and they do it once and they do a great job, they don't want to do it again. And to me, I think, why would you not want to do that? Why would you not want to use your talent? You know, in all honesty, I wish I had a lot more talents than what I did so I could do a lot more. But as I get older, I find other talents that I can use for the church and use for God. But to take the one talent we may have, or to take any talent we may have and just sit on it and not use it, well, that's what this man is getting in trouble for not using his talent. Those who have talents can be an asset to the church, and they must use them. You must use your talents. The church has always needed workers. John 4 and verse 35, do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. The church always needs workers. There's always an area we can use someone. Even if it's just someone who is cleaning for the person who normally cleans, they're not here. That's still an area you need. Or someone who is filling in for a teacher who's not here, or filling in for a preacher. Brother Chris is preaching for me next Sunday night. He's using a talent. He has an area, has an opening, he's going to do that. And that's an example. We can use different examples. You have that talent, you have that ability, there's always a place to be used. And also, as you notice in the parable of the talents, do you remember what the servant said when the master came back? He says, Lord, I know you were a harsh man. He really starts putting the blame on his master. And you think about this, we cannot blame others for our disregard in working for the church or for God. We cannot blame someone else or cast it off on someone else and use that as an escape for why we're not doing something for the church. Sure, there's a lot of excuses, but there's never a good reason. An excuse is it's not real, it's not genuine. And the reason is I broke my leg, I was in the hospital, I couldn't be there. There's always a lot of excuses, but there's never a good excuse. We have good reasons, we never have a good excuse. Faithful service to God and to the church is always rewarded by God. And some would say, well, how is it always rewarded by God? Well, when we say that, we know that a lot of people would say, well, where has God rewarded me? I don't see my new car outside. I don't see the new addition to my house. They think of it in a physical sense, where some go to that extreme, a miraculous sense. Well, I wasn't, blasted with all the knowledge that I ever wanted. Well, no. But what happens when a faithful Christian leaves this earth? Eternal life. There is part of your reward. And sometimes we forget that. We're focused on other rewards we think we should be receiving from God. But He always rewards those who are faithful to Him.
I heard something last night that I thought was really interesting that I hadn't really thought of about sowing and reaping. Brother Cagle said, have you ever realized that you sow a seed, but you reap a whole lot of seeds?
Mm-hmm.
You reap a lot more than you ever sow. And his point was make sure you're sowing the right things.
Yes. Yes.
If you're sowing to the wrong, you're sowing to sin and discord and all that kind of stuff. He said you're going to reap 10 times what you've sowed, and vice versa.
Yes, and we need to make sure what we're sowing is worth to be sowed. It's going to be good. Matthew 25 and verse 28, we see, if you do not use your talent, it may disappear. The Bible says, so take the talent from him and give it to him, and he has 10 talents. When we were in Bible school, preaching school, especially talking about Greek, we said if you didn't use it, you're going to lose it. Well, I can tell you that lost a long time ago. I worked hard as I could through school with it. I worked some with it afterwards. But being in the work of the preacher, some find more time for it than I do. And I tell you, I have zero time for it right now. Not because I don't want to, but now if I go back and look at it, it's going to be like I'm almost starting over again. Well, if you have the talent and ability to preach and to teach and to do other things, you don't use it for a long period of time, you're going to be going back and getting on that bike and trying all over again, learning what you were doing, starting all back over from the very beginning. So if you don't use your talent, you may very well lose it. And as I mentioned before, when a person uses their talents, they are able to fine-tune them and improve them. So as you use them, you're going to improve. Getting to the verse I mentioned before, As we keep talking, having questions and things, I know I'm going back and forth in my outline. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's all right. 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 12. For if there is first a willing mind is accepted according to what one has, and not according to what he does not have. Meaning we're not going to be judged on talents or abilities we don't have. You can't be judged on something you don't possess. If you don't possess the ability to teach a Bible class, you don't be judged on that. But I think some things you really can be taught that ability. But if we don't possess the ability, say in my case, I don't possess the ability really to be a good song leader right now. And the Lord, I don't believe He's going to judge me on that because I don't have that ability. I couldn't carry a tune in the bucket if my life depended on it. But there are other talents we can use. So if we don't have a talent, the Lord will not be judging on that. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And not according to what He does not have, 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 12. And the last one we'll look at, we have two more before we look at before our break. Some are too afraid to use their talents. Matthew 25, verse 25, just the first part of that verse says, and I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. You think about that, we know that depending on, especially when we're doing something for the first time, you may be terrified. I remember getting up in preaching school and chapel service doing my first lesson, and you could probably hear the pages of my Bible shaking. Not because there are a lot of people there, but because about 5 feet from me stood the director with a nice critique sheet. And it didn't matter how well you thought you did. When you sat down, he got up like he did for everybody else and could critique you in front of everybody. Well, we can't allow our fears to keep us from using the talents we have and to improve the talents we have. And we see in verse 25, this man, the Bible says, I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. You think about the talents given to the men, the 10, the 5, and then the 1. The Lord is trusting them with their talent. And you think about, really, that shows some degree our responsibility to use them. If we're being entrusted with a certain talent, we are responsible to be using it. And no one could be prosperous if they took their money and put it in a mattress and pull it out 2 years later and expect it to grow by 10%. That's not going to happen. You have to use it. You have to take what is given to you and actually use it, much like we do our talents. We know we are to use our talents for the Lord. Matthew 25, verse 26 says, But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew. And he begins to talk about what he knew. Today we know the Lord wants us to use our talents. It's not something hidden. If you have a talent, and really think about it, that's really just common sense. If you have a talent or have the ability to do something, and have, as we talked about before, you have the opportunity, it is our responsibility to use that talent. We're expected to use that talent. Okay, we're going to stop there, and we're going to take our break. And of course, when we think about someone giving excuses, I always go back to the book of Exodus chapter 4, where Moses says, Oh Lord, I'm not an eloquent man, or I'm not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Basically saying he's not a good public speaker. Think back now to when I was in high school, and I took a class called Oral Communications, speech class. And I hated that class, getting up and having to stand before people and talk. And of course, in high school, everybody's still nice, Nobody ever makes fun of you. But so you had to get up in front of this class and present these presentations and make these little talks and things. And I think about how back then, how much I loathed it, but how those things have changed over time. I think about Moses, how that changed over time, and how he developed into a spokesman for God. Even though we know, of course, he does use Aaron, but nonetheless, he doesn't make these excuses. He does do a lot more than what he's willing to do here. And we see in Exodus 4 and verse 13, another attitude. He says, Oh Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send, anybody but me, the attitude being there. So excuses for not using talents. Now Moses was obviously a very talented man, no doubt the most well-known Old Testament character, probably aside from Christ, is probably maybe the most well-known character besides Christ and maybe Paul. But he is one who, in the very beginning of things, was no doubt unsure of himself. But over time, as I mentioned before, as you use those abilities and talents, they improve. And with Moses, we see that as well. And we go back, and we're going to do some comparison here, comparing those examples of Christian talents we talked about earlier and some attitudes or excuses concerning those things. Think about encouraging others. Well, some may say, how do you encourage someone? Or they're unsure of how do you go about doing that. What do you say to them? What do you do? What do you not say to them? Because sometimes we have those who, in an attempt to encourage someone, that may condone something they're doing, condone a simple action. So again, they're unsure of that. But of course, being the church, we should help them learn how to encourage someone in a righteous and godly manner. But yet some will use that excuse and decide not to be taught or shown a better way to do things. And they'll use that reasoning for not being an encourager. Instead of being a helper to those who are struggling, maybe they'll say, I don't know how to help those who are in need. Or sometimes we have those who just say, I don't want to help someone in need. And I think, the first time I met Terrence, I think you heard about this story when I was in South Carolina. I was there. I got to this congregation, and I don't care to say their name because those who were there, you can't deny what was going on. But they were a good congregation in many ways. But nonetheless, they had a huge problem with racism. And being in South Carolina, depending on where you're at, it could be really, really bad. When I say really, really bad, we're in a business meeting. We're in the office. We're a small group of people. There's 5 or 6 of us there. The phone rings. Someone needs help. You know the first question I heard? Are they black? You know, that to me, the first thing I think of, is he supposed to be a Christian? Because being a man in a small congregation and being a man in general, you're going to be a leader. If you have elders, you're going to be someone who's looked up upon as someone who is a leader, an example to follow. And obviously that was an example to follow. But those who don't know how to help those in need, or those who do not want to help those in need, or maybe they're particular about who they help in need, are those who what? They need to change their way of thinking. In some cases, they need to repent. What about those who are a promoter of church events and activities? Well, instead of being a promoter, maybe they say that, well, they don't attend those activities themselves, so how could they encourage someone else to attend? Now, think about that. If we're going to encourage someone to attend our gospel meeting, unless we have a prior engagement and explain it to them, well, I encourage you to be there. This is the reason I'm not going to be there, and actually be a good, righteous reason, like I have another engagement. But to say, invite someone to come to a meeting or to an event, and then you yourself willingly not come when you're able to be there, that's the wrong attitude, isn't it? So if we're going to encourage someone to attend our own events, our own activities, we ourselves need to be there. What about those who are afraid to stand up in front of people? I had a man when I was in our congregation who I was told, don't call on him just out of nowhere. You got to let him know that he's going to lead a prayer. Because if you call on him just, at the end of a service, he may very well break down, have a heart attack. He'll freak out, basically, because he had a huge fear of speaking in front of people. He had to have his prayers written down, and that's not bad. That's not wrong. That's fine. Sometimes it's better for people to do that, because they'll get up and say things, you're like, what are you talking about? So he had it written down. But he was afraid of standing in front of people. But in other ways, now he wasn't a perfect gentleman, but in other ways, it was also encouraging, because when he was assigned a prayer or something, he would pull that note card out and he would do it in front of the congregation. Now, you knew very well it scared him a lot, but he still did it. And at least that, in that sense, was indeed honorable. We do have those who are afraid to stand in front of people, and they use that as an excuse. But again, a lot of these things, in many ways, can be overcome or can be taught so that you can use those talents or abilities, or develop those talents or abilities. Some say when there comes time for an event of the church or activity of the church to do something, they say, I don't have enough time. And really, I love when people tell me that excuse, because that's the worst one you could use. Because you think about the things that we have in this life, we know there are certain things you cannot avoid. Doctor's appointments, things. Sometimes you can reschedule, and sometimes because of what it is, you probably shouldn't. But there are a lot of people who say, when they say I don't have enough time, what they mean is, I don't have time for that. That's the difference. Some things are actual good reasons not for being there, and others are just excuses. I don't have enough time for that. I can't squeeze that into my schedule is what they mean by that. I remember when we were living at another location, working in another congregation, we had a man who was in a leadership position. I say leadership, he's one of the men. And when it came time for the sports to come around, his son was active in soccer and active in baseball. And we know when those tournaments were on the weekends and also on Sunday. And what I thought was interesting was how he tried to spin that around. He talked about how he sacrificed Sunday so he could go and do this. And I thought, you have it backwards. How could someone say, I sacrifice this? No, you don't. You're sacrificing God is what we're doing. And that happened this past few months ago. Chris and I played in a league in basketball, and it's supposed to be a Monday night league. Well, lo and behold, they put some games on Sunday. Well, what happened? Well, what do we have to do? You have to decide, make a decision. Are you going to keep going or are you not? Well, obviously being Christian men, we chose not to go to those things. But you know how many people would go to that? Probably the majority would go to those types of things. Others would say they don't know how to prepare for a class or for a sermon. Well, those types of things, yes. Yes, sorry.
I was going to make a comment with that. We have 3 kids, and they're very heavily involved in athletics and coaches. But, a lot of times we get those frustrations. It's not frustrating for us because we're not going to.
Right.
But it is frustrating sometimes just because they put things on Sundays and Wednesdays and things like that, where even denominations go to worship
Oh, yes.
on those days, but they still do that. And I think sometimes we as Christians need to maybe even head up some activities, even if it's in our communities, to where we kind of take the leadership and put
Right.
it on the days that we know that won't
Yeah.
interfere with our worship, because a lot of times we get involved, but we're not, heading
Right.
those things.
When you show people that it can be done in a certain way, you do it enough, they'll pick up on that. And I think about sometimes one of the reasons you have those things on Sundays because people said, well, this is when it is, I guess I'm going to have to go. Instead of saying, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So they just kind of go with the flow.
I knew a guy one time a preacher who they put in charge of PTA of high school, and he would, all of a sudden the proms weren't there anymore. And he said, no one, because he came at it with, we'll do something on different nights, and these are other activities, like you said, that were more appropriate.
Right.
Not immoral and things of this nature. He said, I didn't have a problem at all. He said, everyone gets scared that someone's going to say something. He said, we didn't. He said, the whole time I was in charge, for like 5 or 6 years, they never had prom.
Yeah. There's always
they
an
never had
alternative.
dances through the middle schools and high schools and all
Yeah.
those kinds of things. They did other things. They replaced them with moral things.
There's
And,
always an alternative to that.
Yeah, and he said no one complained about it. Now he said as soon as he left, it was within a couple of years, another one came and reinstalled it and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But he said, we always get scared, what are they going to say or who's going to be upset. He said,
Yeah.
if you do it right, they won't.
I remember there was a man, and I forget who it was on Polishing the Pulpit, and he talked about a prom alternative. And what they did, they had it on the same night, at the same time, with the kids still dressed up, modestly. And they came, they had their pictures taken, they had their meal, and they still didn't go to that prom. They had other things for them to do there at the church building. So they didn't remove it, they just replaced it with something else, what we call definitely Christian alternative to that. Because you think about proms, I don't know if there's anything Christian there at all that a Christian could do. You go get your pictures taken, but how many people are going to go there, get their pictures taken, and then not stay there because all your friends are there, so we know what's going to happen. Okay, next we're going to look at, does having a certain talent give us certain privileges? Ezekiel 33 verses 31 and 32 says, so they come to you as people do, that sit before you as my people, and they hear your words, but they do not do them. For with their mouth they show much love, but their hearts pursue their own gain. Indeed, you are to them as a very lovely song of one who has a pleasant voice and can play well on an instrument, for they hear your words, but they do not do them. And what I think about here is the idea is we have those who, when you talk to people sometimes, especially about mechanical instruments, and one of the arguments you hear is, well, they have this talent. And I think, so what? You know, because you can, if you have a talent like playing the guitar, great, but it doesn't mean it belongs in a worship service. If you have a talent doing other things, like playing piano or being you have a band or something, well, that's fine, but it doesn't mean it actually belongs in worship. So just because we have a talent or ability doesn't mean it actually should be in the worship service.
My brother played the trumpet all the way through middle school, high school, very good.
Mm-hmm.
And his teacher, who he had private lessons with, always was trying to get him to go to these denominations because they'd pay him to play the trumpet. My brother kept saying, no. He'd say, well, you know, this is a talent. Doesn't God want you to use your talent? Dale said, what do you think I'm using it for? I'm teaching you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just because we have a talent doesn't mean it actually belongs in a worship service, doesn't mean it actually even belongs in the church. Are there talents that do not have a place in the church? And as I mentioned before, of course, mechanical instruments, John 4:24, those who worship must worship in spirit and truth. And you can't do those things or have those things and worship God in spirit and truth. What about one that we're seeing a lot of today? And I say today, I'm sure it's going on for a long time. We have a lot of women preachers today, don't we? We have a lot of reverends, we have a lot of pastors and doctors, blah, 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 who have, as the Bible tells us, no place in where they have put themselves. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, that a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach, or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. Now, of course, we know there are some that say, well, that the Church of Christ, that the Lord's church, is derogatory or hateful towards women. And you think about this, if you actually go back and look at other New Testament scriptures, we see that women are actually given a place to do a lot of things. There's just some places the Lord says, that's not what I want. And we have to realize is when we get into that area, is we have people who have, well, this is what the Bible says, or what you're telling me the Bible says, but I still want to do this. I have this ability. Well, every ability has its place. Sometimes it's within the church, in the Bible class, in the proper setting. Other times it has no place in the church at all. Obviously, not all talents have a place in the worship assembly or even in the work of the church. Now, I'm going to pass this around. Or if Terrence, if you wouldn't mind, I know he's got plenty of energy after this long trip. This is an article from a series of articles I did. I did a series of articles actually based off a lectureship book from 39th Street there in Independence, Missouri. Their lectureship book was called Keeping the Church Alive. Talking about different things you can do to help the church grow, keep the church active, and keep the church prospering, keep them doing things that can actually help them move forward and not allow the church to shrink. Now this particular article deals with what we're talking about tonight, talents. And you notice the title I gave it was necessities, and one of the necessities in the church today to keep the church moving forward, not progressively in a liberal doctrinal way. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about evangelizing and keeping the church growing, or getting the church growing maybe. Those types of things is what we're talking about, not progressive in the sense of alternating or changing our doctrine. Now, and I'm just going to read through part of this, and some of this we've talked about already tonight. There are things that are necessary to grow physically, exercise, food, water, etc. There are also things that we need if we are to grow spiritually. Knowledge, love, understanding, patience, and so on. Now, in the second paragraph, our talents must be used because they are necessary for us and others to grow. If the church is going to grow, and that's really what our lesson is getting down to, we need to use the talents that God has given us. We need to make the most of the abilities that God has given us and blessed us with, so that we can help the congregation that we're at and others we may work with on other occasions, help them prosper in the Word of God and prosper in the church. How can one help others grow, help the church grow, if they're unwilling to use their talents? No talent is too small or viewed as odd when it comes to doing what is necessary in growth. When I say odd, I mean something like having the ability to make the building smell nice when you walk in on Sunday morning because it's just been cleaned. That's not really odd. I'm glad for that. because especially after VBS this week, I'll be glad when we come back on Sunday and it smells nice, not like a bunch of sweaty little kids. So that's not, I mean, some may think it's odd, but it is a talent. It is an ability, because believe it or not, some people cannot do that. So it is an ability and a talent that is necessary. No matter if it be song leading or serving on the Lord's table, even preaching, are all talents that should be used and must be used because they are necessary. Why must we use our talents? We talk about some of those things. The first thing we put out there is it's logical. And that's really another big part of this. To me, it's illogical for a Christian not to use their talents. Romans 12, in verse 1, I'm not mistaken, talks about how this is it is our sacrifice, it is our reasonable service to God to use our talents. And in many ways today we have those who think, well, you're asking an awful lot of me. I mean, you're asking me to lead a prayer. You know, that's a small thing for a lot of us. But they have that mentality and put it in other areas. And to me, it's just unreasonable. And another problem we have today, and we know that talents, as we have talents, even though as we grow older, our physical bodies keep us from doing certain things. It's just part of life. We may not be able to use our talents as we once were. But also we have those who have this ability or this mindset that they're going to retire spiritually. They have talents they can use that could really help the church, but they have decided, well, I'm done. I've done my share. And I know as we grow older, there are some things we simply cannot do, and that is understandable. But there are some things that I just cannot grasp how we could say, well, can you find someone else to do it? Is there really a reason why we cannot do something when we have that ability and are still able to do so? And on the fourth paragraph, second, because we care about the lost souls in the world. Different talents can be used in different ways to reach the lost. I've been very grateful and very thankful that since I've been here, I've been on 2 mission trips. This past February, I went to the Marshall Islands, and last year I went to Mexico for a week. And I'm grateful I'm able to do that because I'm able to find other talents and abilities I didn't know were there. Like talking to someone and picking up a lot of Spanish in a week's time, I didn't know I could do that. But you do that. You learn how to invite someone in Spanish to your gospel meeting or to your seminar. Luckily in the islands, I didn't have to learn Marshallese because that sounded a whole lot different. And a lot of them speak English, so I didn't have to worry about that. But you find new abilities, new talents you can use. Just below that, the 5th paragraph, I believe, another reason for using our talents or abilities is our reverence for God. I like to say sometimes our respective fear of God. If we really feared God like we ought to, we'd be a lot busier. We'd be doing a whole lot more. And sometimes today, and you may feel the same way, we think about how people do or do not do certain things. How much different the church would be if we actually feared that day when Christ comes back. Because for some people today, when Christ comes back on the second coming, He's going to find them doing nothing. He's going to find them on the couch watching TV while the church is struggling to grow, and He's going to ask, what are you doing and why are you sitting here? So we have to make sure that we use our talents. One of the reasons we use our talents is because we fear God and we respect Him, and we want to obey Him and use our talents. Below that, the 5th reason to use our talents is that they are our personal responsibility. We talked about that already. You have the ability, you have the opportunity, it is your responsibility to use it. And the final reason for using our talents is that in using them, we perfect them. We've already talked about that. Now, we go back, and you can read that a little more later, and there's some other articles that go with that if you're interested in that. But this is just one part in keeping the church alive and keeping the church growing, is using our talents. That's just one piece of the big puzzle it takes to put together for the church to grow. We have to use our talents. We have to make sure we're encouraging others. We have to make sure our parents are doing their part, make sure our leaders are doing their part. All those types of things lead up to the church growing and the church being edified. So tonight we have seen that every person has a talent. There's something we can use for the church, something we can use for God. And with our responsibilities, or with our talents rather, comes responsibility. It's kind of like those superhero movies. With great power comes great responsibility. Well, with talents, there does come responsibility. If you have the ability to do something and talent to do something, you should use it. And there is no good excuse for not using our talents. And even though we do have a certain talent, doesn't mean it belongs in the church, or especially in our worship assemblies. Any comments? Yes.
I was just thinking, the master still had to discern how much he was going to give each one of the slaves. So he gave 5 and 4 and 2. Is that right?
I think it's 10, 5, and 1.
Yeah, 5 and 10. So he had to discern what he was going to give. And it reminds me, though, in Acts 6, when the apostles told the brethren to choose from among you men with good reputation, number 1, full of the Spirit, number 2, and wisdom. So when we're finding those people who we're looking, they might have a talent, but they also, I think, have to qualify for that. And then when you think of qualify, I think of the elders, and there's qualifications for them to serve as an elder. But the number 1 is they got a desire. And I think of somebody who has to desire it. Now, if they have all the qualifications, but they don't have a desire, then I think they got a real problem. And that is they don't have probably the heart of God that they need to have. But I just think of the master himself. We have to be discerning whenever we go and ask someone to lead. And by being discerning, understanding that, okay, this servant can handle this much, but maybe this servant or this man, he can't lead singing, but he can lead a prayer. And don't put him in a position where it may question him or put him in a weak position himself.
In getting to leaders, you think about, I know one congregation I think has this problem, where you have men who have certain abilities, say to use for the church, and they want to put that person as a deacon. But the problem is they don't actually meet the qualifications. They're only part way there. They may be a good personal worker, or say a good tax keeper, a good bookman. They may be a good groundskeeper, but they don't have the spiritual qualifications. But because they have an empty spot and the person has that ability, there you go. Well, that's not what the Bible wants us to have. And that's, I think, is what you're talking about some there, is you have the talent, but they don't have the godly desire. They're not doing other things that are right. So even a good talent, the wrong person, can cause a lot of harm.
Yeah, just, piggyback on that, I think that's something that we have to do is strive to instill that desire in people. I teach a leadership class there in Kinder, and one of the things that I teach the men is that what were you born with the desire to do? Not a lot. That's about it. That's the only thing you were born with, is that desire to sleep. Right? And so desires have to be instilled within them. My kids like to play football. That's something that was instilled in them. Like to ride dirt bikes, that's something that was instilled in them. They weren't born wanting to do those things. And so, by the same token, people don't naturally have the desire to serve, the Lord in these capacities, but they have to be taught. It's like we teach our kids anything else. So, I agree.
And sometimes you have those people who they, when you're lucky, they see a need. They don't have the talent or the ability, but they learn it. They're willing to say, well, I'm not a good Bible class teacher, I've done that before, but I'm going to figure out how to prepare material. I'm going to figure out how to make an outline and get all the things together so I can teach this class, because we need someone in this position. And if we had a lot more people like that who had that desire, willing to learn that ability and to get that, to have that desire to do those types of things, the church would be so much different than what we have today. Could you imagine what the church would be like if everyone used their talents to the very maximum? Or even if you say let's back up, say they use 50% of their talent. It would be a lot different people. We'd be doing a whole lot of different things. Is there anything else tonight? Yes.
The one thing that we've alluded to it, I think, but I don't know if we've actually said it, but just our very presence in our friendly gestures that we make one to another, whether it be in the assembly, or whether it be in a fellowship, or when we meet on the street or whatever, you know, that is a talent that goes a long way in strengthening the church and strengthening the bond between Christians.
Yeah, because the person who's always there is a person you can encourage. It's amazing how almost all of these, I think, have encouragement involved. Being somewhere, talking with someone, just visiting with them, being friendly, that's going to encourage someone. Because you imagine walking to a church where someone, or just part of the congregation doesn't greet you, doesn't talk to you, isn't very friendly. I'm not going to go back there. If they're not very friendly, why would I want to go there? Because that shows really a lack of concern about that person. So yes, being there and being friendly with someone and talking with someone is going to be an encouragement, because even that is lacking in some places.
We have a guy who, probably many of you know, who's got Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And he told me one time, because he's probably one of the best encouragers I've ever been around. And he told me a couple of years ago when he found all this out and everything was going on, he said, Landon, I can't get up and do prayers and stuff like that as much anymore. He said, I can't really, because I'm afraid I'll forget or what will happen to me. He said, but you know, I can always tell you did good. He said, I can always go up to someone and say, that was a good prayer, or that was good singing, that was a good sermon. He said, I can always go up and see how someone's doing. And I have never seen him where he doesn't talk to just about everybody who goes through that door.
Yeah.
Where he's not shaking his hand saying, how are you doing? And if they led singing, then that was great singing. If they, sermon, great sermon, Landon.
That goes a long way in developing balance.
It does, and goes a huge way. And as a preacher, and you guys know, when you're sitting in the back and someone generally comes to the back of the auditorium and tells you that's a good sermon, that's going to put some pep in your step and encourage you more. And when we do that to other members as well, it does the same thing, or at least it ought to do the same thing to them. Okay, if there's nothing else, we're going to stop.